Okay. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up homepage HTML. Actually, I'm going to edit it, open it with Notepad. I'm going to add in another link. I'm going to call this one JavaScript. Can everybody see my screen okay? I'm going to right click. I'm going to also click open, which should automatically open it into Firefox. Now I click JavaScript, files not found, so I'm going to go back and create an HTML page for JavaScript. I'm lazy, so what I'm doing is I'm taking my, I'm leaving my style, my header, my body tag. This is my website. And doing the save as. Okay, here's JavaScript page. So, does everybody understand what the, when I talk about a variable, does everybody understand what I mean? I heard no from Diane. Okay, so if I do use any terminology someone's not familiar with, please speak up as soon as you hear it. If it's a new concept, if it's a new word, there's some stuff I'll probably explain that you don't need explanation, but then there's other stuff I'm going to talk like everybody in the world should know it, and that's not, you know, and that's not necessarily true. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you first is to a text box and what we can do with a text box and a label. So I'm going to say this is going to be input type text or quote text if we want to do it correctly. We're going to give it an ID. This is how JavaScript's going to know this input box. We're going to call this first name. Now, one thing about JavaScript, which is different than some of the Microsoft languages like VB and .NET that we're going to learn, is it's case sensitive. So it helps when you start developing that you kind of stick with a pattern. So a lot of times when I call something in JavaScript, I'm going to start off the variable or the ID with a lowercase. And if it's a concatenation of multiple words, I'm going to take the first letter of each sequential word and make that capital.
It's called camel casing.
Camel casing?
Mm-hmm.
I knew there was a technical phrase for it. I didn't know what that was, but I knew the one probably existed. So I'm going to put breaks after here. Now I'm going to put in an input. Type equals button. I don't have to give it an ID. In this case, I won't. I'll show you that you only need an ID if you want JavaScript, if you want to be able to interact with it with JavaScript. So I'm going to do an input type button. It's either text or value. I'll try one then the other. Sam says it's value, but just to show you that I don't know what I'm doing half the time, I'm going to call it text equals submit. I'm going to refresh my page. And I have a button, but the button doesn't really have anything in it. So Sam is correct. So here we have value. And if you get stuck, if you know enough to actually just get started, and you get stuck, really, if you go to Google and type in input boxes and JavaScript and input buttons, you're going to get more resources than you can possibly read through.
W3 has a lot of information on it as well. W3's goal set.
So I have two text boxes and a submit button.
Yes. So where does that go?
Where does
First name and last name go?
it doesn't go anywhere right now.
Okay.
It doesn't go anywhere. In fact, I have not told the user that there's anything, the user's looking at these as like, wow, what's this for? But so in front of these boxes, I could type in like first name and last name. And I only put in a carriage return so that everybody in the class can see all my code. Has anybody gotten to this part? Everybody has the input boxes on a page? Or do we need a couple minutes? Okay.
This is exciting.
Are you excited?
Yeah. Scripting always
It's going to do something.
Scripting gets you right.
Jim, how you doing?
Okay.
Okay. How do you make the boxes line up? If you wanted to make the boxes line up, then I would put them into a table with the first name in left-hand column and then the box in the right-hand column. If you wanted the submit to be centered in the middle, then you could put that into a column row, column span 2, put it into a cell, and that's how you would lay it out. I'm not going to use a lot of layouts because I want you to be able to first keep up with me in creating this, but also so that we don't put a lot of style stuff on the page. So we're not going to style this really well. We're not going to lay it out very well. Everybody should know how to do that or be able to lay this out better. But I want to keep it clear just so we can understand the JavaScript code. Okay, so now if I click this button, submit, nothing happens. I haven't actually programmed it to do anything. So here out in the submit, I'm going to say on click, and I'm just going to say run button. I'm going to save it. And if I click on it now, nothing happens. If I put parentheses like Sam says I should do, now I am surprised I'm not getting an error telling me.
Actually, you need to pull up the error console.
Oh, yeah, see, IE, I'd probably get this nice little error that pops right up telling me what's going on. Firebug kind of like hides it. So I'm going to pull up the Firebug console. Console panel is disabled. I'm going to enable. Reload to activate the window console. So when I click on it, it tells me run button is not defined. I already knew that. I said on click run button, but I haven't said that run button actually does anything. So this is where I'm going to put my JavaScript up in the top of my web page. I'm going to concatenate a couple of my lines so it's easier to see. So you make a JavaScript block almost like we do a style block. Script type equals text JavaScript. Script, end script. Inside of here, I'm going to make a function for my run button. I'm going to say function. Run button. Now, after a function, you put parentheses, and I'll show you what those parentheses are for down the road. But then we want a brace. I want to give it a couple of braces, and inside my braces, I'm going to say alert. Hello. And I'll give everybody a couple minutes to catch up. What's that?
Coffee or anything?
I'll make some after. You feel like coffee?
Go either way.
What's that?
Go either way. I'll be later on one time.
Yeah, your first break. Now, JavaScript is a programming language that is running on the visitor's machine. Sometimes we say it's the visitor's machine. Sometimes I refer to it as the user machine. It is code that is not ran on the web server. So the web server will serve up JavaScript just like it is here. It's just text. The web server that this resides on, in this case it's my computer, but let's say I wanted to publish this page, put it on a web server, and you visited my page and you downloaded or you viewed this website. This comes across right as text. The web server does not care what's in the page. It doesn't matter if it's just a bunch of random words. It's going to send over whatever you have in the text document. the JavaScript, when you click that button, is all running on your machine. When JavaScript first came out, there were some browsers that didn't support JavaScript, and there was other ones that allow you to turn it off. And I don't know if you can you still turn it off?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you can turn JavaScript off, and people were afraid of it. This is how, JavaScript running on your machine. The first browsers allowed some JavaScript hacks to where people were, you visit a website, you got a virus, or people had more control over your machine because you physically had code running on your machine. Browsers nowadays try to protect your machine, and they do a really good job of it, protecting your machine. The code that I can do here in this function, I can't access your operating system. I can't access your files. I can't just go hopping around and destroy your computer. JavaScript is widely acceptable now as just a client-side scripting. The browser, you've installed the browser actually has a lot of control on your computer, and it's responsible for being the security to keep the JavaScript programmer from doing damage to your machine. So we have the alert button, which is the alert function. Alert is a built-in function. We have created our own function called run button, and we have used a built-in JavaScript function called alert. We don't actually have to build that. It's just a function that exists as part of the browser.
What happens if you put a capital A on alert?
Let's take it out. Alert is not defined.
Now you remember seeing that when we tried to run button without having written it up in the upper screen there. Just wanted to let you guys know that the JavaScript is very case sensitive. If you got even one character out of whack, it's going to not do what you think it's going to do.
So the next thing we're going to do is a variable. In JavaScript, you define a variable by saying var, and we're going to call this var first name and var last name. Now there's two ways I can do this. I can say var variable equals a value, or I can simply declare var first name and then put first name equal to something down below. But for now, I'm going to say var first name equals, and in parentheses, I'm going to say A, just to make sure it works, and last name equals B. So I declared two variables, first name and last name. This would work, if, so in algebra, you have X and Y's. This is no different. X is a variable, Y is a variable, first name's a variable, last name's a variable. I could have used a single character. I don't have to call it the same thing as my ID. It does sit separately, so if I wanted to name it like something else, if I just wanted to name it first or just name it last, I could do that in my function. I think that's such a great idea. I am going to just declare my variables as first and last, shorten them up, first equals A, last equals B. Now right now, this alert hello is text. And JavaScript knows it's text because I put it in quotes. When I put it in quotes, I'm telling JavaScript that this is literal translation. Hello is not a variable, it is real text. If I took out the quotes, then JavaScript is going to look at hello as a variable. Let's go ahead and I'm going to save this, refresh my page, click submit, and it says hello is not defined because it's expecting hello to be a variable, it expects it to be declared, have a value, and it does not. I'm going to put my strings around my hello, And in JavaScript, if I wanted to concatenate values with literals. Now, literal is a string that I've typed in quotes. A variable is something that has a value. So I'm going to say hello space quote. I'm going to put a plus sign first, plus sign last.
Another way to refer to your hello there would be a constant. That's what originally formed the distinction. Was constants were things that were written right to the page, and variables were the things that could actually change inside of your script.
So you can also call it a constant.
Okay.
But a constant, and when we get to .NET, is going to be a variable declared somewhere else for the whole application,
Right.
or for that page code.
Technically, any string you put in there is a constant. In the loosest definition.
Anything that doesn't change through the programming is can be considered a constant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's a good way to think of it to avoid confusion when you're learning this stuff.
So the one thing I didn't do is it concatenated A and B, and I don't have a space. So I'm going to put in a quote, space quote, with another plus. There's my first and my last name. Now, of course, we don't want A and B. We want what is in these boxes. So in order to get what's in these boxes, I'm going to say var first equals document dot get element by ID. And then in quotes, I'm going to say first name dot value. I'm going to open this up a little wider.
Make sure you pay attention to the casing for that get element by ID.
Now, once we get into Visual Studios, as soon as I typed in document dot, get element by ID will actually show up in a drop-down. And so you don't have to, it used to be once upon a time, yeah, I had to remember all this. But Visual Studios is going to make it easier once we start getting into that next week. So I'm going to do the same thing for my last name.
Copy and paste is your friend.
Unless you're learning how to type. I actually forced myself to type out a lot of stuff so I could, because I actually learned to type right about the time I learned to program. So I had to force myself to type correctly. So I'm going to reload my page, see if this all works. Get element by ID is not a function because I believe ID is not completely capitalized. It's I lowercase d. Now, when I work with JavaScript, the reason I do the camel casing is because JavaScript has a tendency to use camel casing a lot. You can see the document, the dot value, it's all lowercase, and then the get element by ID, gets lowercase, everything else, first letter is uppercase. And so when you get into that habit, and you're designing a page that has a lot of lines, you're not in one place trying to remember the case that you use. You get into a style of using a certain case so you don't second guess yourself, and it helps out with your development speed.
So in the alert line there, you have a space after hello.
Yes.
And it shows up in your box. So instead of having a separate element for the space, can you not just put well, there's no brackets around the first, though, is there? Because it's a variable.
That's a variable. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So if I didn't have the space after the hello and JSON would all be together.
Run together.
Run together. So that's my space between.
Because that's actual text that you're telling to show that text.
Yeah, that is text, a constant or a literal text. And then first and last is just going to be whatever value that I have placed in those boxes. You got a couple of you have a lot of spaces, like a space. I would go ahead and put a return there, and I would take out the space before value. Same with down below, and I would take the space out after get element by ID. Scroll down a little bit. Let's make sure that you ended. Okay, your function is missing the last brace. So after the alert, hit or underneath the line, under alert, you want an ending brace. Okay, scroll up a little bit. Okay, that looks good. Let's go ahead and run now. Okay. Okay, so nothing's happening. So let's go ahead and open up Firebug.
Oh, you need masking recruiters.
Hey, Sam? Oh, wait, never mind. How do you dodge Firebug in the bottom of your string?
The middle button into the middle. I think the middle button should set you back into dump mode.
The middle button.
Yeah. So right. Over.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Okay, so go ahead and click on errors. Go on the console, click on errors. Fourth line down.
Oh.
Console, then click on errors below it.
Now actually try and do it because
Let's go ahead and, yeah, let's go. Now, go ahead and maximize that screen. Maximize Firefox. Okay, so go ahead and refresh your page. Firebug went away. Let's go ahead and open Firebug again. Go ahead and just click on the bug this time. Okay, then click on your submit. Your submit button that you made up in the top.
Oh, okay.
Run button is not defined. So that's the lowercase b versus uppercase b problem. So down at the bottom of your screen, you can hop over to Notepad, and you have run button. So you have run button correct up there, but not down in your button itself. So that needs a capital B on the run button.
default.
Go and open up Firebug again and get that line. I'm not sure why every time he refreshes the page, he loses Firebug.
Yeah, I don't know. It might be a behavior that it does in XP.
Okay, now go ahead and hit submit. Run button. Okay, let's go back to code a little bit more. There's something I'm missing. Oh, okay, so that's all. Currently you have, okay. Scroll down. Change that style to script.
slash style in underneath.
You should already have
Well, I just changed it to script. I mean, should it be?
Oh, go ahead and go up. Then we're probably missing you would have an end style tag there. Right after style. So you would have your begin style tag, all your styles, your end style tag, then you would have your script tag, all your script, and your end script tag. Let's go up Firebug again. I think that might be XP.
But I think we have an extra brace.
Let's go ahead and remove some of the extra spaces, the extra line breaks, so we can see everything in one. Oh, we're missing a double quote in front of the word text, type equals.
And that needs to be a parenthesis.
And then double quote after type equals before text. Script type equals.
This is in the actual. This is an attribute on the tag.
Oh, okay.
So you have the ending quote, you don't have the beginning quote.
Oh,
So you put a quote there. And go ahead and run that.
Plus sign first and then double quote. Not inside the quotes, but rather.
You use it first?
I'm working on trying to get it.
Not the plus.
Yeah.
I think that should set you straight there.
Get those breaks to show up my
That's my.
JavaScript running into my first name.
Yeah.
I do just change it.
That's awesome.
Okay, thank you.
You have some CDs and TR tags and the A tag there. That you can probably get rid of everything on that line. Get rid of the space and get rid of the space there. No, you want a space there. No space, yeah, after text and after ID. Let me look at your code really quick up there. Function, run button, that's inside a script, your end style tag's okay. Declare your second variable as last. Both your variables are first. So make that one last. You have one first name and two last names. So down here, let's get rid of the second last name.
Supposed to be.
Well, you have the first name is fine, then you have last name input, last name input. So it's just like you copied and then pasted twice. Get rid of that line and the line below it. No, go ahead and do the. Go ahead and do your instance first. Yeah, that line and the line below it.
This says test instead of text.
Okay, that would definitely cause a problem too. Button value submit on click is run button. Yeah, go ahead. I'm going to get rid of those two breaks. Yeah, let's try that. I don't think it's refreshing.
That's the right button.
did you save over here on the JavaScript text?
Oh, wait a minute, it's saving it as JavaScript text
Instead of HTML?
HTML. I see.
Okay, so yeah, so. Okay, test it out. Looks good. Good. How's everybody doing in the background? Everybody has it? You do, Rob?
So it's really not storing those
Got it.
variables
You good? That works?
anywhere other than an active memory.
Right.
At this point.
Yeah, the page is the extent as far as that can go. I just wanted to give you guys a quick anatomy lesson for our scripting on web pages. Whenever you are dealing with any active content on a web page that is JavaScript based, it will always be within these tags without fail. It cannot work any other way. And anytime you want to declare a function, it will always have the following pieces. There will always be the function keyword. You'll have to give it a name. It'll always have these parentheses after the name, and there will always be braces right after the parentheses and at the end of your set of instructions, because it's important to think of this as a block of instructions for your page, because your page doesn't know how to provide a UI to your users. But it does have the tools that allow you to tell it how, and that's what functions are for. They tell your user interface how to work. So variables will always start with var, all lowercase, and comments will always have 2 slashes in front of them. And it's good practice to always end your lines with a semicolon, because that is actually the standard way of writing JavaScript is line ends with a semicolon. That way the actual engine, when it's reading through your script, it can say, okay, well, he's done with this line, I can move on. Otherwise, say you accidentally backspace and you join 2 lines. Well, JavaScript's going to see that as 1 line of code and try and execute it as such, and that's going to cause an error. If you had ended your lines with your semicolon, you can pull 2 lines together. You can have your entire script on only 1 line.
How you doing, Jim? Did you get that working?
And that's the anatomy lesson. Remember, functions, name, parentheses, curly braces.
Okay, great.
And all the good parts go inside of the curly braces.
Anybody else have a question? Do we have any questions at all? Okay. So another thing that we can tell you is like this document.getElementById. Sam may be able to explain the different pieces of this. But getElementById is, again, it's a built-in function. It is a function that came with JavaScript. It's inherent. It's built in. You can use it. Now, what would you call that, Sam, when you have document? Document's going to be my page object, and then dot, and then a function.
It's called dot notation. Document is, you remember when I told you guys everything on a page is an object? It's like a card that you are setting in front of it. Well, JavaScript actually functions no differently than that. Document is the representation to JavaScript of your entire web page. Now, when you do dot getElementById, getElementById is a function that has been built in to attach to document. So it's called a method. It's a method to document. So calling document.getElementById tells the JavaScript engine to go to the document object, look for the function getElementById, give that function the parameter, and then we'll explain parameters a little bit more later. We'll give that function the parameter of a constant string that says first name, and then when that function is done with everything it's going to do, it's going to give you back something that contains another property called values. Now, that would lead you into the question, what's the difference between a method and a property? They both start with dot, and they're both attached to something else. The key there is the parentheses. Parentheses are how JavaScript says, do stuff now. Whenever you have, if he were to just put .getElementById, actually, Jason, alert, document.getElementById.
Go ahead and alert that. Like that there?
Yeah, lowercase d.
Oh, yep. Missed.
Now the first one is Jason's hello alert, and we see here it actually it tries to spit this function out for everyone to see, but the best it can do is says, hey, you asked me to put a function, you're asking me to put a cat where the words go. Cats do things. It says native code here, but you know that you're not calling your method. You're just treating it like a value property. So methods have parentheses afterwards that usually accept some sort of other input from elsewhere on your page to allow them to do the work that they were originally designed to do. And most of those methods will return to you some type of object that has properties that you can actually consume on your page. And we'll actually, in the advanced JavaScript course, we'll get into, why dot value and how would I find out what all the different ways of, things that could come out of .getElementById, because there's many more properties that come back from this. We're just accessing one of them, and that's properties, values, and methods. Anyone have any questions about that? Because that was actually something I had a lot of trouble with.
I did too. I don't have trouble understanding it anymore, but it took me a while. I do have trouble memorizing it like the way Sam has. And that's the difference between Sam went to ITT.
Yes.
Yeah. So Sam went to ITT. I'm completely trained. So that's really going to be a big difference. Is I don't have or possess some of the underlining structures and understanding. Doesn't mean I can't code a web page.
Yeah. And this is truly the most important thing about JavaScript is understanding methods and values. So if there's any confusion about this, even later today, please stop us and we'll explain it, because this is the dot notation is the pillar of JavaScript. I can't stress that enough. You'll see it so much you'll be sick of the period.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is underneath last name, I'm going to type in full name, and I'm going to make another input box. I'm going to call it ID full name. So now I have first name, last name, and full name is blank. Now, when I refresh in Firefox, keeping my values is something that Firefox does. Other browsers do not. Does IE9 do it now?
No.
Okay.
Only Firefox does it, and it is incredibly annoying.
Actually, I like it for testing purposes because I don't have to retype. In IE or Chrome, if I was to refresh my page, these values are going to go away, and I have to type them in again.
And on the other side of that coin, if you have code that's actively putting stuff into your fields, one thing to watch out for is little tricks that browsers do to make the user experience better for the person sitting in front of the computer. Is sometimes you can have leftover data that you don't expect because the browser's doing it without your implicit permission.
That is true. Okay.
That's just one of the little stumbling blocks that sometimes we fall into. I know I do all the time. Darn hidden fields.
So up here in our function run button, we have two variables. We're grabbing values from two text boxes. We are alerting it to the page. The next item on our list, what I want to do is I want to concatenate the name and pop it back into that box. So the way I would do that is document.get element by ID, or get element by ID. And you can copy and paste. And then here I'm going to say full name dot value equals first and last. So not only can we get value from a text box, we can also put value back into a text box. Background color or BG color?
I think it's BG color for the attribute. I don't think it worked with the image one.
No. Does everybody have that? So I added 2 lines. I added the full name text, full name input box. Then I added the document, get element by ID, full name value, set it to the first and the last. Now there's 2 approaches to coding something more complex. What I'd like to do is dive in using CSS, a table, some input boxes to create a mini calculator. Well, let me take that back. I think a full functioning calculator may be a little too much. But the next step I'd like to do is create a couple of boxes, be able to have a drop down to say whether you wanted to add, subtract, multiply the values, and then put the value into a third box.
That's cool. And then we can move up to making the button send table.
What's that?
We just do it in 3 phases. Just do the 2 boxes, calculate, and then just use the
question.
Yes, uh-huh.
I was just wondering, that third box where the full name is,
Okay.
right now you can click in it and erase it or type into it. How do you make that just like a read-only text field?
Ah, good question. Read
Or it
only.
would just display?
I think with the input, I think there is a read only equals true,
Read
or just plain read only.
only. Oh, read only equals read only.
Oh, read only equals read only.
Yeah, because you can't have attributes without values.
Okay. Did it used to be read only true? They changed
It
that.
used to be just read only or read only equals true. Just having the attribute used to be the way to do it, but they've since made the rule that you cannot have an attribute without a value following it. So the standard way to do it is read only equals read only.
Okay.
Same way with checked.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question. So read only. Now I cannot type in this box.
And save it.
Thanks.
The other thing that I'd like to do is, what I'm going to do is go ahead and set the width of these boxes too. Sam, width or style?
You can use either one, really.
They still support both. They change things so often from browser to browser, and I have been out of programming for a while. Well, I still program, but just not as much as Sam and Dustin.
You do need picks, though.
I do need pics. Okay. So let's go 200 pixels. I'm wondering if that was the default now. Let's go down. That was either the default or the code is not correct. I'm going code not correct. So test out Google input box width. Customizing the size of an input box. Ah, size equals 10. Okay. I think that's 10 characters. So let's change this to 10 characters. And we'll make the full name 20. Okay. So that made my boxes smaller. See you, Diane. Have a good night. Now, if everybody's finished with that, what I want them to do is, what we're going to do is create a new text. We're going to create a new text box and a new button for get time. And we're going to populate it with the time on the user's machine. So I'm going to say get time. Actually, I'm going to make this a button. I'm going to call out to another function that I have yet to develop. So when you add a second function, you can add the second function into the same script block as the first. Is it now? Is it, what's that?
Right.
Yeah, so I'm just going to look up JavaScript,
I think it's just new date.
get time. Wow, there's actually a get time method. Returns number of milliseconds since midnight, January 1st. Okay.
1900.
That's probably not what I want. I want the user's time.
I think it's just new date. And then
New date?
yeah.
Okay.
Date, open close parentheses, dot capital STRING.
This gives hours, get minutes, get seconds, get months, get date, get year. And then new date. So var now equals new date. So I'm going to put it back into my blank box, document, get element by ID, and let me see what I called it. I didn't call it anything. I didn't give it an ID yet. Okay. Let's say I'm going to call it ID time, even though it's, what?
You put that in the button.
Oh, I put it in the button. Just get rid of it there. Var date time, bit element, time, done value.
Date time got two strings. You're trying to put a date type into a string type.
They have two strings, huh?
Capital S.
I'm sorry, what was that, Mark?
In the bottom line that shows on the screen there, don't you have extra quotes after value?
That's actually two double quotes.
Just a way of saying empty.
But I don't have to have, yeah. So that's just as if I took out the text. So you always have to have them in pairs. If I don't have any value to put in there, putting in two double quotes is required versus leaving it open like that.
Oh, lowercase b. Get element by ID.
I did it again?
It happens.
No, I have it lowercase. Oh, lowercase b. Uppercase b. That little Firebug is fantastic once you know how to use it. Sam was trying to get me to use it for probably 2 years before I actually did. I used to just struggle with it and finally get it, you know, trial and error.
It's all our box debugging. Yeah, actually Dustin was Firebug. I was the IE developer tool.
Ah,
Then Dustin
okay.
converted me to Firefox, and so then I was touted.
Yeah, it took me a long time to convert to Firefox too. I was definitely an IE user. So, the function get time, and then these two new lines right here. And we'll take a break when you get that done, or if you have that done. Now, since you're using IE, you know you can click on the little yield sign at the bottom for the error.
Yeah, just put two parentheses up and close parentheses. Because date is actually a function.
Yeah. So what Sam was saying is when you look at my var date times equals new date parentheses, date is actually a function. Date is calling out. There again, it's a built-in function. And so when I originally tried to set my text box value to date time, it didn't like it because date time is an object. It returns a lot of different properties that you can do with it. So converting it to a string, which is converting it to text, we did that by the dot toString at the back of the value.
Close your function. Gets me a lot too. That's why I get into the habit of whenever I write the function, I just type in my second one. Yeah, and then I just hit enter.
How you doing, Jim?